Hello, this is Monday, April 6th. I'm Paul Griffin. I'm going to be reading to you from the short story by George William Curtis, published in 1856 by Harper and Brothers. The title is Titbottom Spectacles. It was written in the 19th century, and it's an excellent story about basically humankind, how we perceive others, how they perceive us. I hope you enjoy it. I know I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I've read it twice now on my own, just simply to get used to the phrasing, the terminology. They spoke and wrote a little differently in the 19th century, which is fine. I like it. It seems to me, anyways, a little more formal. So here it is. I'm going to be reading about 15 minutes today, maybe. The whole story would be around 57, 58 minutes long, but I'm not going to read it that long, as I don't think you want to sit that long watching somebody read a book, but it is enjoyable. And here we go. Titbottom's Spectacles by George William Curtis. Prue and I do not entertain much. Our means forbid it. In truth, other people entertain for us. We enjoy that hospitality which no account is made. We see the show and hear the music and smell the flowers of great festivities, tasting as it were the drippings from rich dishes. Our own dinner service is remarkably plain. Our dinners, even on state occasions, are strictly in keeping, and almost our only guest is Titbottom. I buy a handful of roses as I come home from the office, perhaps, and Prue arranges them so prettily in a glass dish for the center of the table that even when I have hurried out to see Aurelia step into her carriage to go out to dine, I have thought that the bouquet she carried was not more beautiful, simply because it was more costly. I grant that it was more harmonious with her superb beauty and her rich attire. I have no doubt that if Aurelia knew the old man whom she must have seen so often watching her, and his wife who ornaments her gender with as much sweetness, although with less splendor than Aurelia herself, she would also acknowledge that the nosegay of roses was as fine as and fit upon their table as her own sumptuous bouquet is for herself. I have that faith in the perception of that lovely lady. It is at least my habit, I hope I may say that by nature, my nature, to believe the best of people rather than the worst. If I thought that all the sparkling setting of beauty, this fine fashion, these blazing jewels of lustrous silks and airy gauzes, embellished with gold-threaded embroidery and wrought in 1,000 exquisite elaborations, so that I cannot see one of those lovely girls pass me by without thanking God for their vision. If I thought that this was all, and that underneath her lace flounces and diamonds and bracelets Aurelia was a sullen, selfish woman, then I should turn sadly homewards, for I should see that her jewels were flashing scorn upon the object they adorned, and that her laces were of more exquisite loveliness than the woman whom they merely touched with a superficial grace. It would be like a gaily decorated mausoleum, bright to see, but silent and dark within. Great excellences, my dear Prue, I sometimes allow myself to say, lie concealed in the depths of character, like pearls at the bottom of the sea, under the laughing, glancing surface of how little they are suspected. Perhaps love is nothing else than the sight of them by one person. Hence, every man's mistress is apt to be an enigma to everyone else. I have no doubt that when Aurelia is engaged, people will say that she is a most admirable girl, certainly, but they cannot understand why any man should be in love with her, as if it were at all necessary that they should be. And her lover, like a boy who finds a pearl in the public street and wonders as much that others did not see it as that he did, will tremble until he knows his passion is returned. Feeling, of course, that the whole world must be in love with this paragon who cannot possibly smile upon anything so unworthy as he. I hope, therefore, my dear Mrs. Prue, I continue to say to my wife, who looks up from her work regarding me with pleased pride, as if I were such an irresistible humorist. You will allow me to believe that the depth may be calm although the surface is dancing. If you tell me that Aurelia is but a giddy girl, I shall believe that you think so. But I shall know all the while what profound dignity and sweetness and peace lie at the foundation of her character. I say such things to Titbottom during the dull season at the office, and I have known him sometimes to reply with a kind of dry, sad humor, not as if he enjoyed the joke, but as if the joke must be made, that he saw no reason why I should be dull because of the season was so. And what do I know of Aurelia or any other girl, he says to me with that abstracted air, I whose Aurelias were of another century and another zone. Then he falls into a silence which it seems quite profane and to interrupt. But as we sit upon our high stools at the desk opposite each other, I leaning upon my elbows and looking at him, he with a sidelong face glancing out of the window, as if it commanded a boundless landscape, instead of a dim, dingy office court, I cannot refrain from saying, well, he turns slowly and I go chatting on, a little too loquacious perhaps about those young girls, but I know that Titbottom regards such an excess as venial, for his sadness is so sweet that you could believe it the reflection of a smile from long, long years ago. One day after I had been talking for a long time, we had put up our books, and we were preparing to leave. He stood for some time by the window, gazing with a drooping intentness, as if he really saw something more than the dark court, and said slowly, perhaps you would have a different impression of things if you saw them through my spectacles. There was no change in his expression. He still looked from the window, and I said, Titbottom, I did not know that you used glasses. I have never seen you wearing spectacles. No, I don't often wear them. I'm not fond of looking through them, but sometimes an irresistible necessity compels me to put them on, and I cannot help seeing. Titbottom sighed. Is it so grievous a fate to see? Inquired I. Yes, through my spectacles, he said, turning slowly and looking at me with a wan solemnity. It grew dark as we stood in the office talking and taking our hats. We went out together. The narrow street of business was deserted. The heavy iron shutters were gloomily closed on the windows. From one or two offices struggled the dim gleam of an early candle, by whose light some perplexed accountant sat belated and hunting for his error. A careless clerk passed, whistling, but the great tide of life had ebbed. We heard its roar far away, and the sounds stole into that silent street like the murmur of the ocean into an inland dell. You will come and dine with us tonight, Titbottom? He assented, and by continuing to walk with me, and I think we were both glad, and when we reached the house, and Prue came to meet us, saying, Do you know, I hoped you would be bringing Mr. Titbottom to dine? Titbottom smiled gently and answered, He might have brought his spectacles with him, and I have been a happier man for it. Prue looked a little puzzled. My dear, said I, you must know that our friend Mr. Titbottom is the happy possessor of a pair of wonderful spectacles. I've never seen them, indeed, and from what he says, I should be rather afraid of being seen by them. Most short-sighted persons are very glad to have the help of glasses, but Mr. Titbottom seems to find very little pleasure in his. It is because they make him too far-sighted, perhaps, interrupted Prue quietly, as she took the silver ladle from the sideboard. We sipped our wine after dinner, and Prue took her work. Can a man be too far-sighted? I did not ask the question aloud. The very tone in which Prue had spoken convinced me that he might. At least, I said, Mr. Titbottom will not refuse to tell us his story of his mysterious spectacles. I have known plenty of magic in eyes, and I glanced at the tender blue eyes of Prue, but I have not heard of any enchanted spectacles. Yet you must have seen the glass in which your wife looks every morning, and I take it that glass must be daily enchanted, said Mr. Titbottom, with a bow of quaint respect to my wife. I did not think I have seen such a blush upon Prue's cheeks since a great many years ago. I will gladly tell you the history of my spectacles, said Titbottom. It is very simple, and I am not at all sure that a great many other people have not a pair of the same kind. I have never indeed heard of them by the gross, like those of our young friend Moses, the son of the vicar of Wakefield. In fact, I think a gross would be quite enough to supply the entire world. It is a kind of article for which the demand does not increase with use. If we should all wear spectacles like mine, we should never smile any more. Oh, I am not quite sure we should all be very happy. A very important difference, said Prue, counting her stitches. You know, my grandfather Titbottom was a West Indian, a large proprietor and an easy man. He basked in the tropical sun, leading his quiet, luxurious life. He lived much alone and was what people call eccentric, by which I understand that he was very much himself, and, refusing the influence of others, they had their little revenges and called him names. It is a habit not exclusively tropical. I think I have seen the same thing in this city. But he was greatly beloved, my bland and bountiful grandfather. He was so large-hearted and open-handed. He was so friendly and thoughtful and genial that even his jokes had the air of graceful benedictions. He did not seem to grow old, and he was one of those who never appear to have been very young. He flourished in a perennial maturity and immortal middle age. My grandfather lived upon one of the small islands on the West Indies, St. Kitts, perhaps, and his domain extended to the sea. His house, a rambling West Indian mansion, was surrounded with deep, spacious piazzas covered with luxurious lounges, among which one capacious chair was his peculiar seat. They tell me he used sometimes to sit there for the whole day, his great, soft, brown eyes fastened upon the sea, watching the spectacles of sails that flashed upon the horizon while the evanescent expressions chased each other over his placid face, as if it reflected the calm and changing sea before him. His morning costume was an ample dressing gown of gorgeously flowered silk, and his mourning was very apt to last all day. He rarely read, but he would pace the great piazza for hours with his hands sunken into the pockets of his dressing gown, and an air of sweet reverie which any author might be very happy to produce. Society, of course, he saw little. There was some light apprehension that if he were bidden to social entertainments, he might forget his coat or arrive without some other essential part of his dress. And there's a sly tradition in the Titbottom family that, having been invited to a ball in honor of the new governor of the island, my grandfather Titbottom sauntered into the hall towards midnight, wrapped in the gorgeous flowers of his dressing gown and with his hand buried into the pockets as usual. There was great excitement and immense deprecation of gubernatorial ire. But it happened that the governor and my grandfather were old friends, and there was no offense. But as they were conversing together, one of the distressed managers cast indignant glances at the brilliant costume of my grandfather, who summoned him and asked him courteously, "Did you invite me or my coat?" "You in a proper coat," replied the manager. The governor smiled approvingly and looked at my grandfather. "My friend," said he to the manager, "I beg your pardon, I forgot." The next day my grandfather was seen promenading in full ball dress along the streets of the little town. "They ought to know," said he, "that I have a proper coat, and that not contempt, not poverty, but forgetfulness sent me to a ball in my dressing gown." He did not much frequent social festivals after this failure, but he always told the story with satisfaction and a quiet smile. To a stranger, life upon those little islands is uniform even to weariness, but the old native dons, like my grandfather, ripen in the prolonged sunshine like the turtle upon the Bahama banks, nor know of existence more desirable. Life in the tropics I take to be a placid torpidity. During the long, warm mornings of nearly half a century, my grandfather Titbottom had sat in his dressing gown and gazed at the sea. But one calm June day, as he slowly paced the piazza after breakfast, his dreamy glance was arrested by a little vessel, evidently nearing the shore. And I'll stop there for the day. As I have been having trouble emailing these recordings through my Gmail account, as they seem to be too long. So I hope you've enjoyed the beginning of Titbottom Spectacles. It is a good story. Please stay tuned to it when it comes back up, when you see me again with part 2 of Titbottom's Spectacles. I hope you have a good day in front of you. I hope this quagmire that we're in the country and the world will end soon, and that we can all remain healthy. And blessings to your day from Paul Griffin at the Duluth Public Library. Bye-bye.